Okay, let's pick up from last week. We were talking about, we left off, we were talking in the mitzvah of Kuf Tzadi Daled, the mitzvah Veheshem as a Gzela Shagoza. Ram says, and we're not going to go into this properly this last week, that the mitzvah is to return the ben, and if the ben is not kayim, to give domim. You get the impression domim is part of the mitzvah, even though Mishnah Torah is not mashma, it's clearly not mashma like that, and the Gemara is also not mashma like that. V'omer Yisale v'heshiv es hagzela asher goza. Ukfar biro b'beseches makis shelav de gezel ulav shentilase. V'omer achmono v'omer, in the Martikei Shmua, they said, Rachmono Omar Sigzo, and Vehesh Bezera Shegozo, that's the detail last say. Now, this, just to understand what the mitzvah is, and then to move on and understand what the issue of Chaimish is. As we mentioned, the Ram quotes that the Gemara Makis says that the lav of Gezel is nitik lasei of Eish. The question which we have to ask here is if the Rambam had talked about lav nitik lasei when it comes to the lav of Gezel, we understand that he says this lav doesn't have malchus. But if he's quoting it over here in the Mitzvas Aseh, why is he telling us this? So I don't know if I mentioned this last week, or I might have mentioned other times in the past. If you look at the parsha of Vehesh Gzela Shegozal, you're almost overcome by wonder and tema. Where's the mitzvah over here? Because it says v'hoye ki yechta v'yoshem v'hesh v'gzeh shegoza, when he comes to the conclusion and is ready to be moida that he was a chayte, then he should return the gezel. Asher gozel, or es ha'ishek asher oshak, or es ha'pikod asher hofkad. He told, or es ha'aved asher motza, or mikol asher yishpa olov lashoker, v'shile moise b'roishe v'chamishi tzal yosef olov. So the Heidah is akdomo to the chiyuv chaimish. So Pashtus is that Vehesh Bezela Shegozel is not a mitzvah, but it's a sipur dvon ba'alma, and it's a prologue, and it's nigh to the chiyuv chaimish and osham. Until the chayte is moide v'hoye ki yechta v'oshe is moide, until that point he's not chayim. And that's the Rambam in Hilchos Gzela in Perek Zayin Halacha Ches. Ein anishpa al kfiras momoy mishalem choymesh ad sheyoyde me'atzmoy aval im bo edim v'hu oimed b'kfirasa mishalem akeren uvad al pi edim ve'eno mishalem es achoymesh she'achoymesh yimakobel lechapore heim boim ve'eno mevi oisan el al pi atzmoy. So maybe that's the reason why the Rambam quotes the Gemara Makis over here in the Mitzvas Aseh to tell you that Veheshiv is not Sipur Dvon Ba'almo. Since it's Nitik Laseh, you can only have a Nitik Laseh if there's Mitzvah Aseh. So you see from the Matiki Ashmur that said that the Lavli Sigzal is a Lavli Aseh. So you see very clearly that there's a Mitzvah Aseh over here. Okay? That's point number one. And even though every yeshiva bach is trained, there's a mitzvah of Heshav Zexela Shegazal, Lachayr looking Chumash, it's not poshut at all. And the Ram learns that was the Chiddush of Matiki Ashmur, that is Taka mitzvah. Now, something else happened over here, and a lot of things going on. We'll see exactly how you put it all together. The Rambam is Machadesh that the Tesefes Chomesh is an expression of the mitzvah Heshiv. Heshiv or the Hoshev is Exela Ba'atzmo, Im Hu Nisha Ba'atzmo, but Tesefes Chomesh. So Tesefes Chomesh is part of the mitzvah Heshiv. And it's not a mitzvah nifredes. In Minyan Mitzvahs, the Ram has Tesefes Chomesh as a part of a mitzvah of a Heshiv, and he has a separate mitzvah, Kuf Yud Ches, a mitzvah of Tashlumi Chomesh by Me'ila and Truma. In Minyan HaKotich, Zivonu, Shia Kol Hanene Min HaHektish, Oy Oichel Kodesh, Kloima Truma Bishkogo, Mishalim Masha Ochal, Oy Shia Masha Nene, V'Tesefes Chomesh. However, when you look at Shurish Yudalid, you get a very different impression. You get the impression that there is a separate mitzvah called the Oynish of Chomesh. And the Rambam originally presents this mitzvah by Gzela. And he says every peculiar type of Oynish is a separate mitzvah. And in each Aveil, which is Machayah that Oynish, that chiyuv is not a mitzvah, but the conglomerate of all these, the singular chiyuve malchus is one mitzvah. The conglomerate of all the chiyuve hereg, or cherev, excuse me, hereg, chenek, sreifa, or skila is separate mitzvahs. But the peculiar case where you chayiv skila, the peculiar case where you chayiv sayif, or the peculiar case where you chayiv sreif or whatever, or malchus, those are not mitzvahs. And the conglomerate of the chiyuv chomesh is also a mitzvah. So, a priori, one would have said that the chiyuv chomesh in Shurish Yudalid is not only, that mitzvah is not only by Gezel, but it's by Oishek and Aveda, because they have the same Tesefes, chomesh. And then you might entertain that the chomesh of Gzela, of Me'ila and Truma also b'chal. The Rambam at the beginning of the Shurish is clear that it's a chomesh of Gzela. You can imagine it includes other things also like Aveda and Oishek. Umehem mashetzivo mis'ale shenan shoiv aleim b'mamoinoi levad loy begufoi k'moi shekonas begazlin tesefes chomesh. Come on. And the Sefer Shurish of Yudalid the Rambam writes Chomish Stam. He doesn't say Gazlan. He calls Vidin Tosefes Chomish. And maybe he's including not only Oishik and Aved and Pikodin, but also Mil and Truma. The Bahag includes all of them together. The question is, does it mean one mitzvah or five mitzvahs? It's like this. In the in Mitzvas Kuvasei, Vishilum Gezel is one mitzvah, and another is V'chamisha Chumshin. Does he mean 5 separate mitzvahs? And the Rambam is disagreeing with the Bahag? Or he means one mitzvah, exactly like the Rambam. So l'chayra, in Minyan HaMitzvos, you would have assumed if he's working like with the Shoshim, there should have been a mitzvah Tesefes Chomish, and or something about Tesefes Chomish of Gzela. And the Rama puts Tesefes Chomish of Gzela as part of the mitzvah Ve'eshiv. So that seems to be some type of tension between the Rambam in Minyan HaMitzvos and the Rambam in the Shoshim. However, in Mishnah Torah, there's another take on it. In Mishnah Torah, the Rambam changes his mind from Minyan HaMitzvos. And the Rambam only brings Tesef. Here he brings Tesefes Chomish as a chelik of the mitzvah Hashavah. But in Mishnah Torah, when he's talking about the mitzvah V'heshiv, he does not talk about Tesefes Chomish. No mention. The Ram Perek Aleph Zela, Halacha Aleph, and Halacha Hey, Ve'ein loikin alav zeh. Sigzo, we mean Sigzo, Sha'akosav Nitkal Aseh, Shim Gozo, Chayiv Lahazir, Shnev Veheshiv Zela Shagozal, Zu Mitzvah Aseh, B'chule. Kol Agoiza Chayiv Lahazir, Zela Atzmo, Shnev Veheshiv Zela Shagozal. So the Hachzor of the Ben is Veheshiv. Vim of the Oidishtanis, Mishalim Domer. Bein Shehoide Bipiatzmo, Bein Shebo. All of Adam Shegozal is the Chayav L'Shalim HaKeren Levad. So we don't know about Tashlum Keren, and it could be, and you look carefully, it could be it's not part of the Heshiv, but Chomish is not mentioned at all here. And if you look carefully how the Rama mentions Chomish in Mishnah Torah, you get the impression that Chomish is part of the mitzvah of Avos Osham Asham Gzelis. The Ram in Hilchos Gzela Va'aveda Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph Beis Kol Mish Nischayev Moma L'Chaveiroi HaYisraeli V'Kofar Boy V'Nishbal Sheker How is the Chayev L'Hachzir Lo Yakeren Shekofar Boy V'Yisefes Chomish V'Chiyuv V'Chayev B'Korban V'Hu Anikro Asham Gzelis. So it's all the cases you'll see Echor HaGoizel or Oishek or Agoinig or Shilvo or Shehifkid Etzloi or Motz Aveda V'Chichesh Bo or Shoyis B'Neim Shutnis V'Nishaloi Etzloi Momon or Shosam Alocha V'Loi Nosam L'Ischo Kol Shel Dovo Kol Dovo Shiloheide Chayiv L'Shalem Bedin, Chayev Shalom Bedin, V'Kofar V'Nishba Mishalem Kem V'Chomish. Nema V'Chichesh B'Amisai B'Kodem. So he brings Tosefes Chomesh as part of the beer of the Korban Oshem. Mishalem Kev Chomesh. That's what he's explaining Oshem over here. Oshem the Zealous. The Ram Shita is that the Mechayiv of Tosefes Chomesh in Mishnah Torah is the lav v'leishis shakel. It's an oynish for the shekage for Sipikodim. In look at Ram and Hilchos Shvuos, Perik Aleph Haloch Ches Tes Shvuos Sipikodim Keitzad Kol Mi Sheish Momon Chaveru Biyodoi Bein Pikodoi or B'milva Bein B'milva Bein Oije Gozloi or Oshkoi or Motza B'Aveda V'Leichziro Keitzad B'Zeh V'Tova Mimeno Momon Hari Zeh Biyodoi Hari Yesh Loi Biyodoi V'Chipeloi Hari Zeh Oive V'Leisa Aseh Shenemo Lois Shachash Lois Chachashu Zu Azhora L'Kfios Momon Ve'in Loikin Alav Zeh V'im Nishpa Loi Al Sheker Al Moment Shekofa Hari Zeh Oive B'Lav Acher V'al Zeh Ne'emar Lois Shaklu Ish Ba'am Yisrael Zu Azhor Nishpa Kfios Momon V'shvu Zu Edig Shvuos B'Kodem Uma Hu Chayev Al Shvuos B'Kodem Sheshiker Bo Mishalem Es HaKeren Shekofar Boi Im Tosefes Chomesh Uma Krivodem Vadai Oshem Vadai Bein Shoyim Mezi Bein Shoyim Shogim V'chul Shneim V'chish Ba'am Yisrael V'fikodem P'sumas Yoro B'Goz L'chayr is a Sifra in Kedoshim, Parsha Beis, so Perek Gimel, Ocha Gimel, Lo Yisachachashu, Matam Aloima, Lefishne V'chichesh, Bo Lomadu Oynish, Ashol Minayin, Tam Aloima Shaku. So Lo Yisachachashu, it talks about V'chichesh. It's talking about Parsha V'Oshem Gezelos. And the V'chayiv is, or the Oynish, the Ashol is Lo Yisachachashu, and the Oynish is the Oshem. What I assume the Chichash Ramisa also says Kerem V'Chomesh. So that's the Teres Kwan Ram Mishnah Torah. So it's interesting how the Aseh is formulated, the permutations between the Shoshim, Minyan Mitzvos, and Mishnah Torah. Okay. This I think is interesting. But once you have the material in front of you, it's very cut and dry. There's no, I don't know if the chidushim or not. But the next issue, I think, is let me just summarize this, and then I'll go to the next issue. So, one, in terms of the Chiyuv Chomesh, in Sherish Yadalit, it's an Oynish Kloli, L'Shalem Chomesh. In Minyan Mitzvos, it's a chelik of Mitzvos Hashavas Gezel. We have to know what happens with Chomesh in Me'ilah and Truma, a separate mitzvah. In Mishnah Torah, it's an oynish adas holosh chakro, and it's a chelik of the oynish of Oshem Gezelos. So, l'chayr and nafkamina is, what's the din of someone who's geizel and nishpa and hoida, and he doesn't pay the chomesh? According to the Ram and the Shoshim, he is over on the Aseh Akloli of Tashlum Chomesh, whatever that is. According to the Ram Minyan Mitzvos, he's Mavatal the Aseh of Eishev's Gazela. And according to the Ram Mishnah Torah, it's a chsol in his kiyum of Avos Hashem Gzeles. Now, that is l'chayra, the cut and dry over here. Now, I wanted to explore something which I found amazingly interesting. I'm not sure I'm down to the bottom of it. Maybe I am, and you can judge yourself. We just pointed out that the Chumash is not a Chumash of Gzela, but it's also Chumash of Oshek and Pikodon and Aveda, as the pasuk says explicitly. Oh, it's a Oshek Asher. Oh, it's a Pikodon Asher Hofkan. Oh, it's Aveda Asher Motza. Oh, Mikol Asher Yeshava. Allah of Lasheke. V'shilei Moisei B'Roisho Chamish Sa Yosef Ola. Lasher Hulo Yitner B'Yom Hashmosai. So l'chera, since it says v'heshiv, and in the frame of reference of Mishnah Torah, I mean, of Sefer Mitzvas, Mitzvahs here, that v'heshiv is a mitzvah, and that's the mitzvah of Chomesh, and since there's a chiyuv Chomesh in Oshek and Pikodon and Aveda, etc., so l'chera, one would have assumed that the mitzvah Heshav Azer Shegozal includes any case that the Zulas is Machzik Momoin Neged Ritzoin Bailov, and he's Nishba. And maybe the mitzvah is not Veheshav Azer Shegozal, but the mitzvah is Veheshav Azer Shegozal. Oh, it's a Oisik Sheosha. Oh, it's a Pikod Shehofka. Ito. Oh, it's a Veda Shemotza. Oh, because she shove Allah, la sheke, b'shilei moisei b'roishe b'chamishay Allah. Because if you don't do that, it's like Chalife Pupadisa in the Gemara Menachos Yud Zayin and Aleph, taking out the posik and slicing it in two. That's the mitzvah. But we have to keep in mind, as we mentioned before, that Lefi Pshuto Shel Mikra, this is only a hoidah that Sipu Dvorim, after his moida, that he was Meshaker in the Shvuah, he's chayiv to pay Tesefes Chodesh. So on one hand, it's a very interesting tension. The Chachmei Meseira say there's a mitzvah say, and Pshuto Shel Mikra says that it's a hoidah on chiyuv. And derech agav, there's no stira. Pshuto Shel Mikra can be sipur, and the Chachmei Meseira, it's a mitzvah. Okay, next. So, the Chachmei Torah said that the love of Gzela is nitak l'aseh. So that's how the Ram puts it in relation to Gzela. So you have to ask yourself, is it possible to imagine that you can have a mitzvah klolis, assuming everything, and still talk about lavadik laseh? What does it mean exactly? Okay, and what is the mitzvah? But on the other hand, Veheshiv Gzela Shegozal is only after Shvuah. It's even prior to Shvuah. Like every yeshiva bach, you ask him, you a geyser, there's Veheshiv Gzela Shegozal, right? And l'chera, if the Rambam is canning it over here, in the mitzvahs, v'heishem is the gzela, ben, as the Gemara has it, there's a mitzvah say of a Shabbos gzela, even without a shvur. Do you have the same thing by Aveda? So interesting. When we want to know whether there's a mitzvah Aveda, Hashavas Aveda, the Rama is a separate mitzvah Reish Dalet. We're coming to it. Mitzvah Shem. Believe it. Lahoshiv or Aveda Shnemo Hoshiv Toshiv Lachicha. So what do you need this for? It's doch Reish V'Gzer Shegozel V'Es Aveda V'Es Apikol Shehofka V'Es Sheoshkoi V'Es Aveda Sheovat. So, l'cheira, you would have said what Chazal are doing is chiyuv pupadisa, that the Aseh is by gzela bedafka, and you can't learn that in Aseh by Aveda. You need a different pasuk. And you can't say that the Aseh is actually klalis, includes the whole kit and caboodle, and it's only after Shvur. Because the Ram over here says there's an Aseh even by the ban, even before Shvur, on the ban. So the whole thing, just before you think about it, you go to Yeshiva Bach, it's like the Dvom Pshutim, I don't know, maybe a Ches. I don't know anything. Now, the next question is, and if you assume also that the Aseh is only on Pshuta Shal Mikra, then the Gemara Makis has no kiyum, because the Gemara Makis says the lav of Gzela is nitek l'Aseh. It means that Aseh with the Pashut Gzela, and that therefore you don't get Malchus. And once you do that, all the cases in the Parsha, you have to know what you're talking about, and how this all fits in. So the question is Chazal maybe leaving the Pshuto Shal Mikra as it is for Haidor and Chifi Pupadisa to make a mitzvah for Gzela? What's going on here? So then the other question is, maybe, if that's the case, lava nitek l'aseh is mechayev and aseh miyuchad. And fakir, the Rambam not only know that you have an interpretation that it's not a sipur dvorim, at least in terms of gzela, but it's a peculiar aseh for gzela. And that's what he's quoting over here. There's a mitzvah say of Eish V'Gzela. L'chos Pasha L'Rambam. There's an Aseh of Eish V'Gzela. There's no Aseh of Eish V'Sa'osha. Then you have to ask yourself, Tosefes Chomesh, is there a kiyum aseh in Mishnah Torah, in Sefer Mitzvos, of Oshok, of Oishek and Pikodin, and Aveda? We don't know anything anymore. And how to read the Psukim? It's amazing. If you're ready to take this approach, that lava nitel aseh requires a peculiar aseh for a peculiar lav, and that's what he's proving over here. Then, as we continue, we'll understand how the word tazo, which is written once, see, you have a problem. Tazo is written once, and you end up with 4 mitzvahs. A mitzvah of Hashavas Peya, Leket, Peret, and Oilos, with one word. And here, you have Ve'eshek Zera Shegoza, Ve'es Hoishek Sheosha, or Apikoda Shehofka, or Zaveda Shev, or Vat, and you end up with one mitzvah. So how does it happen? So if you say the pshat is that that lav adiktul aseh says each lav requires a peculiar aseh, so then the Matik Yashmor who said that Peya, Leket, Peret, and Oilos lav adiktul aseh, so you end up with 4 new mitzvahs. It's amazing. And here, where they only said in Makis that the lav of Gzeila is nitik laseh, you only end up with 1. All I'm trying to tell you, everything is counterintuitive. Maybe what I said was gibberish, but what I certainly did was I hope to shake up the yeshiva bacha that you learned v'heishim HaMitzvos Gzeila lav laseh shon. This and then you have and also another amazing thing going on over here. I'm just that you can have 2 levels that Pshuto Shomikra is Kayim to tell you that you need a Hidor in order to be Chayiv Teisefes Chomish. And on the other hand, you can split off this pasuk and for the Heishvat Zeh Shagozal, and you have a separate mitzvah. And the 2 are Kayim at the same time. But the only question you have to ask yourself, according to the Rambam in Sefer HaMitzvos, is the Kiyum mitzvah of Hashavas Oishek and Pikodin in the Teisefes Chomish. Next. So that, I think, basically, we're finished with the Mitzvahs Gzeila. I just wanted to make it short and sweet. The first part we did last week, and then this is the end. But this issue of Lavdik Laseh is an amazing thing. Next. Now, Mitzvah Kuf Tzadi Hey. HaMitzvah Achomesh B'tishim Umeya Hi Shetzivonu La'aseh Stoker. It's a very strange thing. In Yiddish, almost like machen stocker. What does it mean? So, frankly, this is Ibn Tibbon. We have no clue where it came from. The Ksav Yad that we have, the Oxford and Kapach, the Tirgum should be Al Hatstocker. Because the stocker is there, and there's the Arabic for hey, a hey idea is there also. So, Al Hatstocker. There's no verb. So he made up a verb and he said, Lasa is stocker. Let's add a different Ksav Yad or something. However, you cannot say that Kedal Kobakodesh, he took it from Minyan HaKotzer or other places, because both in Minyan HaKotzer and in the Prote Mitzvahs and in Hilchos Stocker, her party mitzvah, and Hilchos Stocker proper, in Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph, the Rambam says litain stocker, which we understand, litain stocker. So you can say the mitzvah is al stocker, your mitzvah on stocker, or to give stocker, or to make stocker is a very odd phrase. Now, let's get down to basics. Who is the mitzvah stocker to? Who are you supposed to support? So the Ram doesn't say here at all, a priori. We don't know who they are. Do they have to have an identity or anyone, anything? Okay. In Mishnah Torah, the Ram is very clear that it's to a Jew, at least in all the Kisvei Yad. Mitzvah Perek Zayin of Matnas Aniyim, Halacha Aleph. Mitzvah Aseh litain stocker la'aniyeh Yisrael. In Shinu Nischol, sometimes it doesn't say la'aniyeh Yisrael, but it's not in the Ksav Yad. It might be the Tfus, and there's claims that it might have been censored. I can't tell you anything, but the Kisvei Yad seem to say it's la'aniyeh Yisrael. Problem is, and this will be discussed by Riches a little bit more later, Mitzvah Shem, or next week, Mitzvah Shem. The Ram quotes 3 psukim here. Let's just read it fast. He shetivonu la'asri stoka u'lechazik achaloshim u'lahachiv aleihem, which u'lechazik achaloshim u'la'ametz hadalim u'lahachiv lehem. Okay, make life easier for them. Ukfar bo hatzivui b'mitzvah zo b'milas mischalfus. We'll discuss what that means in Mitzvah Shem. We found a similar lashon in Shorish Chi, and we'll see in Mitzvah Shem in the Arabic. Oma posoyach tiftach es yodecha loy. That's one. The Oma v'chazakta boy ger v'soisho v'chai imoch. 2. The Oma v'chei ochicho imoch. 3. And we'll see v'kavon lebe'ela l'shoin is kulam achas v'hu shena'azer inyonoi u'nechas kem dei sipukom. That is Ibn Tibbon to help them in their things and to be mechazik them for what their needs, what their needs are, whatever that means. Okay. In Kapach, he translates this one word which he adds is very important. Shendechalkel oni shebonu. Shebonu, what would be Shebonu? From us. Okay, we'll come back to the second. Shebonu. V'tamchenu de machzor, and give him, and betamech him his needs, to imal his chson. So the Shebonu seems to be, we're talking about Yisrael, which means there's a remez over here of what he said already in Mishnah Torah. Okay. But then it's very odd. He says, V'chzakta boy, ger v'soishe b'chai imoch. And here is where things get very murky. In fact, because of this, the Minchas Chinuch, it takes the double portion in Tofayin Tes, Ois Aleph, that the mitzvah is a mitzvah say to give tzedakah to a ger tosha. That's what he says. Das steht, if you quote this pasuk. But the interesting thing is, the Rama Mishnah Torah also quotes this pasuk the exact same way and still says Lani Yisrael. Probably I assume the Minchas Chinuch might have had the censored version in the text of Mishnah Torah, but he assumes the double portion that the Aseh is by Ger Tosha. That's what he does. The Rambam, Perek Zayin, V'chus Matnas Ninim Alocha Aleph, Mitzvah say Litein Tzedakah Lani Yisrael V'chulei Shnema Pasoich Tiftach Es Yodecha V'Never B'chzakta Boy Gev V'Soish V'Chai Imoch. Mamish, exactly what you wouldn't want it to be. You know, if you don't have Kapach, you can say the Rambam says Stam, and he quotes V'Chzach the Gev V'Toish V'Zan Ger Toish. Mishnah Torah, he leaves it blank like the censored versions and it includes Ger Toshiv. Oh, it's an Yisrael. Then you have to ask yourself what happened. But this is not a major problem because it doesn't, it says Ger V'Soshav, okay? And is it clear that Ger V'Soshav is a Ger Toshav? Unkelis is Metalgim over here by V'chzakta B'Ger V'Soshav Yodu V'Toisav. I guess it's people who are living in the area, but doesn't necessarily mean a Ger Toshav. And I would have taken that opinion, sided with that approach, because it says by Avraham Avinu in Bereshis Chav Gimel Daled Ger V'Soshav Anochi Imochem. And you understand yourself that the Targum is not Ger Toshav, but it's a Dayar V'Tavitosav. Exactly what's going on here. So to say that the Targum is not Ger Toshav, no, it's not Bashamayim. The problem is the Rambam in Schia Matana, Perek Gimel, Halacha Yud Aleph writes the following: Avol leger toishav beime mechira beime nesina mipnei she'ata mitzuva lachiyesa shenema ger v'soishav v'chai imoch. He quotes mamish this pasuk in Schia Matana and says we're talking about a ger toishav. So now you have a problem. Says Ani Yisrael, you know, if you have the old gear, so you don't have a problem. You can say, you know, what it is. But he says Ani Yisrael here, according to Kapach, the way he interprets the Ksav Yad, it's Bono. So I would have said, the pasuk says like this: "V'chiyomoch ochicho umota yodoi imoch v'hechzakta boy." So let's talk about Israel, okay? And that's the mitzvah stocker of v'hechzakta boy. The end of the pasuk, "Ger v'soish v'chai imoch," is going lachiyosei. So in the Rambam, it says v'chzakta by ger v'soishim. He doesn't mean ger v'soishim, means v'chyomoch achicho umota yodoi imoch v'chzakta boy. And he explicitly says the mitzvah by Yisrael. And he explicitly says ger v'soishim to ger toshim. So maybe he's just trying to delineate which pasuk he's talking about. But the mitzvah is v'chyomoch achicho imoch v'chzakta boy. Both here in Minyan Mitzvas and in Mishnah Torah. it's not only the Rambam that says the mitzvah of tzedakah is only by Yisrael. It's also Rav Sadi Gaon. Rav Sadi Gaon in Perek Yud Gimel, Choivas HaYehudi Klape Yehudi. So the Perek itself describes the obligations of a Jew to another Jew. On page 101, he writes like this: tzedakah is one of these mitzvahs. V'osa lahakshiach es halev, to harden your heart. Klape mishet tzlachov gluyim la'ayin. Kfi shomo leisamitz es levavcha. Aseh Gaon only quotes the lav. He doesn't quote the Aseh. But that's not a problem, because in the Chasimus HaSefer, Aseh Gaon basically says that if an Aseh and a lav are a mirror image of each other, then it's only one mitzvah in Yinam mitzvahs. He categorically disagrees with Shiur Shishi. So if Pesoich Tiftach and Leisamitz Levavcha is basically the mirror image, it's all one mitzvah. So the same with the lav is by Yisraeli, the Aseh is also only by Yisraeli. But it's all one mitzvah. But the Mafsadi Guri doesn't count the Benifra. But the Rama doesn't count the Benifra. They're two separate mitzvahs. As much as the Minchas Chinuch assumes that the Aseh is even by Ger Toshav, it's very clear by him, he says explicitly that the lav is only by Yisrael. Okay, well. Next. So when he says l'chazek achaloshim u'lahachiv aleim u'la'amitz asadalim u'lahachiv lehem, l'chayr is referring to the second pasuk which the Ram quotes here, that v'chazakta boy gave a social. And as you look in Perek Yud of Hilchos Matnas Aniyim, Halacha Zayin, Shmona Mailas Yesh Bezok Zum Lai Mezu, Mailik Deira, She'ein L'Maila Mimenu, Ze HaMachzik Biyad Yisrael, Shemoch V'noisen Loi Matono, Oy Alvo, Oy Yisrael Loi Shutvis, Oy Mamsi Lo Meloch, Gedei Lechazik, Es Yodoi, Actually, it's Tarach Lebrios Lisho. But al ze nemar vehechzak the boy gave a social v'chayimo. Here also you see something. Vehechzak the boy is to machzik him, is to catch him before he falls, and that's the highest level of start. You notice what he's quoting. He's really referring to the moch at the beginning of the pasuk, because he says it's by Yisrael. He says. Ze hamachzik biyad Yisrael shemoch, which is the beginning of the pasuk. However, he quotes Gal ze nema vechzak the boy gef seishem v'chayimoch. Kloima hachazek boy ad shelo yipo v'yitztarech. So again, this shows you it's an odd thing what he's doing, but he clearly is referring to the beginning of the pasuk, and he clearly is referring to a mitzvah of tzedakah by Yisrael. Even though the Ger Toshav in the pasuk is referring to Ger Toshav, that's the end of the pasuk. Ger v'soish v'chayimoch, or umoch or chicha, v'chazak the boy. That's what he's referring to here. Okay, now here next. The Ram uses the phrase, which I found odd. Usually he talks about kefil. He says the kefil. He says another way is you starting from mitzvah hey. He says ulovdoi. In many different ways, he says the word avodah. In the Torah, it says in mitzvah hey, and he counts all of them as kefil. Here he says b'mila mischalfos. The Rambam uses the same lashon in Shiur Shi'i, where he's talking about the Chazor, what's going on. It's one of the more difficult parts of Shiur Shi'i. He's talking about many different types of shikha, and ke'elu a priori interpreted always is also shikha. And he says the Torah says it in many different lashonos, but the theme is one, and it's one mitzvah. That's the concept over here. And that's the chayv he's doing over here. The Torah is saying this in many different lashonos. Poseich tiftach es yodcha, vechazakta boy, and v'chayachicha imoch. Even though you think that the lashonos are different mitzvahs, komash malon, it's mitzvah achas. And that's what the Rambam says, the matorah and the kavanah. This is based on Shiur Shid Aleph, where the Rambam says when the matorah of the mitzvah is one, it's counted as one. Where he talks about Heke Mitzera, and he talks about Lekichas Dalaminim, Lismach Lifnei Hashem, and there is the Heke Mitzera that others should see the Mitzera, know that he's Mitzera, and keep away from him. And here, what's the matorah of the mitzvah? There's Kulam Achas. And we pointed out the Kapach said, translated it as Shenaza in Yonoi, and the Chaz came, Shedechalkel Oni Shebonu, to give him sustenance, Vit Tomachnu Dei Machsor. It means Lechzaktaboy. And this is all one theme. And Memel, it's one mitzvah. Now, here, we didn't talk about that pasuk. We talked about the chzaktaboy gevasosha. V'chei ochicho imoch hu inyan shel achiyoseh shenem al gabe Yisrael. V'yesh lezeh harbe rayos. There are many proofs to this. That v'chei ochicho imoch is lachiyoseh. We had a lachiyoseh by Ger Toshav, which he put to the Ram Zchiyah Matana, and is lachiyoseh by Yisrael. And this is, you look in many sources of Chazal. The Gemara in the Dorim, Mishnah Dorim Perek Tes, Mishnah Dal v'Yomer Meir, Chayis Loi Min HaKosuv, Sheba Torah v'Yomer Loi Ilo Yisi Yedei Shatoiva Al Loi Siko v'Loi Sito v'Al Loi Sisna Zechir Lovecho v'Al Loi Chmoicho v'Chay Ochicha Imoch Shema Yaoni v'Ein Atoyocho Lefanasai. That's to do with Stokka. Omer Ilo Yisi Yedei Shu Kain Lo Yisi Noida Harizemut. Tesefta quotes Ramei Hoye Noime Noise Isha in Ogenes Loi Oive Mishum Chamisha Lavim Mishum Loisikom. If you marry a woman, she in Ogenes Loi. You hold it's not a good shidduch, but you're marrying anyway. Ramei says you violate 5 lavim. Baltikon ubaltito at the marriage itself. Ubaltistas lochichim uvavecho. V'after lechamoich v'chayichimach. The Gemara Mitzvah, some of Beis and Aleph. Achibah v'kiva v'limed v'chayichimach chayecha koimen. So it means you have to l'chayesay. But Mitzvah paid chesam and Beis. Uma odem shiato mitzvah simosay atem mitzvah chayesay Sure, shat the mitzvah chesmosei eino din shat the mitzvah achiyosei oma kol v'cheo chicha imoch or chicha v'lo sho. So this is lachiyosei. It's a chabufush shikabah. So therefore, the Ram quotes when he's talking about Pidyon Aben, he talks about Pidyon Shvuyim. He talks about lachiyosei. In Perek Chesed Matzanim Alochiyud, Pidyon Shvuyim, Koidem Lefanosas Aniyim Lachaseisa. V'ein Lecho Mitzvah Gedolah B'Pidyon Shvuyim, Shashovu Yiharihu B'Chal Re'evim Batzmeim V'Arumim, V'Oimed B'Sakonis Nefoshes, V'Amalim Einov, Mipidyon Ha'Ize'ova, Aloisamis Levovcho, Loisikmat Yotcho, V'Aloisama Dorecho, V'Al Lo Yogadnu B'Forech Leinecho, Ubitel Mitzvas Posoich Tiftach Es Yodecho, Mitzvas B'Chai Ochicho Imoch. So the Gam B'Chai Ochicho Imoch is part of Tzedakah, but it's the Lachiyosei by Israel. However, comes the Ramban, and from the Gemara B'Metzia, Samachalach Beis, Omav Nachman, Omav Yitzchak, my time with the Rebbe Loza, the Omakor v'Chechichi Imoch, Ahadale Kiechi Dedeche. You should return the ribbis in order you should live, and this is a separate mitzvah saying minion of Achzoras ribbis. Whereas the Ramban learns in Shichas Aseh, Mitzvas Yud Zayin, Shestavinu lahachsir horibis shelakachnu me'achinu. V'hi gam kein Mitzvas Aseh. V'omru yis'al al tikach me'itoy neshech u'malbis v'reis melokecha. So the Upside Goyin has a separate mitzvah. He says it's not stalker. He says in the midst of Yehudi Klapi Yehudi, the same parak, 100. Chayv olav v'sayeh b'mozin k'dei shiach shoshenema k'fi shoma v'chei chichi imoch. And lochas does the mitzvah kumva say v'achis och. So it says the tameu. The Ram Shita is that you only go pshuta shom mikvah. Hechyeid nahadalei v'hodlof sikeches yichye is only a drosha. It can't be a mitzvah minyan mitzvahs. And Shiur Sheni says he can't do that. The Ramban disagrees with Shiur Sheni and learns that Doshas Chazal also going to the mitzvah can have a separate mitzvah. Okay, we'll pick up a mitzvah Shem. We'll see in other places how the mitzvah of Stoka is lahachzokas v'echzakta boy dechas yichasona sheyachsa boy. And a mitzvah we'll pick up this week. A mitzvah Shem next week's Shiur will be dedicated to the memory of Rabbi Agoin of Label Dulitz. I didn't do it now. I'm not sure for food, it's clear how it works. So I'm not, and if people know Kabbalah, understand Yossi Mene, but I think next week will be Batuach, and this is the Shama Shem Aliyah.